Hi everyone and welcome to today's session on SLDS, where I'm going to dive into a few concepts and best practices. My name is Aditya and I'm a lead developer evangelist here at Salesforce. You can connect with me on Facebook, LinkedIn or Twitter. Before jumping into the topic, a few housekeeping slides. Basically the forward-looking statement that says please make all your purchasing decisions based on generally available information and not based on what I might say today. And follow us for updates. I mean, not just me and my team, but you can follow the Salesforce developers handles on Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. And most importantly, this session is recorded and the recording will be available on YouTube and Trailhead Live within a week. With that, let's jump into the agenda. So today we are going to discuss what's SLDS, what are the key principles behind it, and then we're going to discuss how you can use SLDS to prototype, build, validate your components. So first, let's talk about SLDS. So what does SLDS stand for? It stands for Salesforce Lightning Design System, and hopefully we are not going to rename it in the future, but we never know. So SLDS is world's first living open source enterprise accessible platform agnostic design system. So that's a lot of words in there. So let's look at what each word means. First word, living. What it means is that it's continuously updated. The UX team releases a lot of new features every release. And I'm going to talk about some of those new features in today's session. Next, it's open source, which means the code is publicly available on GitHub. You can raise issues, submit PRs, and contribute to SLDS. Next, enterprise. For something to be classified as enterprise grade, it must have certain qualities like scalability, testability, reliability, backwards compatibility, and all of those are present in Salesforce Lightning Design System, which is why it is enterprise grade. And coming to accessible, perhaps the most important quality of SLDS, and basically it has accessibility built into its core. And why is that? Because Salesforce as a company is committed to building products that can be accessible by all users. So as a part of that, SLDS components have ARIA roles, properties, and then we have keyboard controls as alternative to mouse-based controls. Then all the images, icons have alternate texts, and then we have the contrast ratio between text and background, all of them conforming to accessibility standards. And finally, platform agnostic, pretty much self-explanatory, which means that you can use SLDS with any tech stack of your choice, whether it is Salesforce or even outside Salesforce. The last term on this slide is design system. And why are we calling it a design system and not just a CSS framework? That's because along with the code, we also bundle design guidelines. That means all the accessibility decisions that we have taken, the design decisions we have taken, all of them are combined and documented into a single source of truth, and that is made available to you along with the code. That is why it's not just a CSS framework, it's a design system. And next, let's talk about the principles behind SLDS. So you can think of these to be like the 4 pillars on which SLDS stands. The first one is clarity, which means there is no ambiguity and then there is no clutter. The user can easily find what they're looking for. Next is efficiency. So SLDS gives you these standardized component blueprints and reusable components that can help you maintain consistency all across the application. And coming to consistency, what it says is the same solution is applied to the same problem. So for example, take the use case of the save button. The save button looks the same across all of Salesforce. It's in blue color. It's not like in some cases it is white and some cases it is black. It's blue because we want consistency to be present. And then of course beauty. It's a user interface framework, so it has to look beautiful. If not, nobody is going to use it. So these are the 4 pillars on which SLDS stands, but these have to be the 4 pillars on which your custom components stand as well, which means whenever you're trying to build something using SLDS on Salesforce, try to maintain consistency. Try to make your components be as clear and less ambiguous as possible. Because whenever a user is using Salesforce, they don't know whether they're using a custom component or a standard component. It has to look and feel the same. And if they are used to a button being in one color, make that to be the same everywhere. So what does SLDS offer? I mean, it's a design system. It's not just a CSS framework. So what all does it offer? First and foremost, it offers a design pattern. What a design pattern is, it's a guideline to create a repeatable experience. And I mentioned all of this is documented on the website. So let's go to the website and you can look at all the design guidelines that we have documented. So for various aspects of UI like data entry, displaying data, there are these guidelines. So if you click on any one of them, you're actually going to see guidelines for displaying data. Like you can display it in lists. You can display it using a table or a tree grid. It's not just the different ways in which you can display, but when you have to use what and how should a display mechanism vary based on the device that you're looking at. So for example, most importantly, the table, which is the most controversial non-responsive UI element. So we have a design guideline for you that says if you're trying to view a table on a phone or in some aspect ratio where the columns don't fit, collapse them into tile lists. So that is a guideline that we are giving out that you can use and follow in your components. So I would strongly encourage you to go through all of the guidelines displayed here so that you are as consistent as possible with what Salesforce delivers out of the box. And not just in terms of all of these, which are visual aspects, but we also have guidelines for voice and tone. What it basically says is your application shouldn't just look like a Salesforce app, they should also sound like it. So for example, things like error messages. Whenever we are showing an error message, what is the message that we are giving there? What is the tone of the message? Is it conversational? Is it friendly? Are there punctuation marks in that message? So all of that has been detailed out in this guideline that you can download and use. And that is what the design pattern is all about. On top of these design patterns, we have pre-production HTML, that is the markup on the SLDS website. So along with the guidelines, we have given you a bunch of different code samples that you can use. For example, if you want to show a grid, there is a HTML structure that you can use that is documented here. And same is the case for many utilities and many component blueprints. So any HTML that you see on this website is actually pre-production HTML, and that is what SLDS offers. On top of which you have your production CSS, and this is the CSS framework. So it contains your styling, it contains icons, your design tokens, all of this is a part of your production CSS framework. On top of the framework, you have interaction guidelines, which are accessibility guidelines. So for that, again, going back to the website, you have a section for accessibility, which shows you both guidelines and patterns. For example, for web design, it shows you certain guidelines like every form field must have a visible label and so on. And then there are keyboard interaction guidelines on how a keyboard interaction should work. How do you test for keyboard interaction? So there is a checklist that we have given out that you can actually incorporate in your QA cycle to actually see if your components are accessible or not. Then there are also these patterns for individual components, like let's say accordion. How does the keyboard interaction work? For example, here for accordion, you can actually navigate to each of the headings of the accordion by using arrow keys. So I'm pressing the down arrow key, it goes to the different headings, and I can press the space or the enter key in order to expand and collapse it. So the behavior is also documented for accessibility. So other than the guidelines that we have given and the testing rules that you can use, we've also created a library called Sally, and you can use that in order to test your Lightning Web Components for accessibility. And for that, there is a blog out there. I'm going to include a link to that in the resources I'll share at the end of this session. So that is pretty much about the interaction guidelines. On top of it, you have your component blueprints, which is your HTML and CSS code for all the different variations of components. And these are framework agnostic. So for that, again, let's go back to the website. There is a huge section for component blueprints. Everything ranging from accordion to avatars to badges, cards. There are a lot of things that the component blueprint is going to provide. So let's just click on one to see what it gives you really. So it shows you an output, of course, and then it gives you the code behind that you can just copy paste. It also gives you the accessibility rules, that how is this component accessible, that is documented. And what it does not do is provide you the JavaScript implementation under it. So for example, if you use this HTML as is, you're going to get this UI, but the ability to collapse and hide sections, that is completely up to you to implement using JavaScript. And that is what you'll have to do when you're implementing it on other frameworks like outside Salesforce. But if you're trying to use SLDS components within Salesforce, and that too within your Aura and Lightning Web Components, we do have base components bundled along with it. So for each, I wouldn't say each, but for almost every blueprint, there is an associated base component. And you can click this button and you'll be taken to the relevant base component. And the advantage, of course, with base component is it has JavaScript also, which means if you were to use the Lightning Accordion base component, you would actually have all of the functionality like expand, collapse built into it without you having to implement additional JavaScript code. So yeah, my internet is slow, so it might take some time to load. But basically what you do is you just include this one tag and then include your sections and whatever is the HTML logic for that. And there are a bunch of JavaScript methods that it exposes, like you can query and find what is the active section name and stuff like that. So a lot of things go into base components. Pretty detailed documentation for base components is available. And we recommend you to use base components as much as possible when you're inside Salesforce. But when you're outside Salesforce, definitely use the HTML that we have given here. And the reason both of these are strongly encouraged is because accessibility is built into them so that you don't have to worry about it. So ARIA roles and ARIA controls, if you can see, all of it is already implemented. Just copy paste and go. So that is the advantage that you get by using component blueprints, and that is what SLDS offers. Now this is a blown out view. If you want to take a screenshot, all the 5 layers neatly documented. So now that you know what SLDS offers, let's get into the next section, that is how do you prototype your components using SLDS. And when it comes to prototyping, I think that is the first step that you or me or anybody who's building a component does, because you'll have to first draw out your component or mock up your component to know how it looks, how it feels, and of course primarily get approvals. You'll have to say, this is how the component I'm building is going to look, can you please approve? So for that purpose, you can use many tools. I mean, things ranging from MS Paint to PowerPoint to even a piece of paper or your whiteboard. You can use any of them, but more professionally, you can use any of these tools on the screen right now. So Sketch, Figma, and Framer. These are the tools, and there is a reason I've mentioned only these 3, which I'm going to tell you in a bit. And one thing to note about these tools is these are not just for designers. So don't assume only your UI team is going to use these tools. You as a developer, you as a business analyst can also use these tools in order to mock up your UI. And since this is just mock-up, you need not be pixel perfect, because you just need to show an approximate design to get approval. And that's just about it. So any one of you can actually start using these tools. And the reason I've mentioned these 3 tools is because SLDS gives you what we call UI kits for each of these tools. Now, as such, Sketch, Figma, and Framer can be used to mock up UIs for literally any website, any framework. But how do you enforce SLDS styles? How do you ensure you're using the components that SLDS provides, the blueprints that we give out? You need not recreate those blueprints using these tools, because the UI kit that we give you for each of these tools bundles things like fonts, your artboards, your reusable components. All of it is bundled into this plugin. You can just install this plugin on this tool and then get going. And today we are going to look at a demo for Sketch. And there are two steps literally. One is download Sketch and then download the plugin, as simple as that. But one thing to note about Sketch is it is only available on Mac computers, which means you can't use it on Windows. You can use the other two, Figma and Framer. Then both of them also have plugins. It's going to work almost the same, but since I have Sketch access, I'm going to show it to you. So this is what Sketch looks like. Basically a blank window or a blank canvas with a bunch of things that you can insert, like shapes, vectors, draw something, write text or something like that. But I have installed the SLDS plugin, and you can access that by going to plugins and clicking on Lightning Design System plugin. So it will take some time to load, and once loaded, it's going to look something like this. So this plugin is going to come out as a pop-up, and what the plugin offers you is all of your components. So whatever blueprints that you have seen, they are offered over here that you can just drag and drop onto your canvas. Then you have icons. All of the icons that SLDS offers is present. You have things like charts. If you want to mock up something like this, you can do it. And artboards. So artboard is where you actually start building out your mockup UI, and we have given two artboards. One is for the desktop interface and one is for a mobile interface. So in case you want to mock up something for the desktop, first drag and drop the artboard, and then you can go to components and drag and drop the components. It's as simple as that. So first let me drag and drop a card. So I've put it here, and I can resize it to how much ever size I want, and then maybe I want to put in the activity timeline. So I click on it and I put the activity timeline here, and of course then I can resize the activity timeline. And yeah, pretty much it. I think you get the idea. So using all of these components, you build out your UI, and once the UI is built, you can export it. But before exporting it, I want to show you one more cool feature, that is the assistant. And in this assistant, we've added what we call the SLDS linter. And the purpose of the linter is to make sure you're following all the best practices. So for example, I randomly add a shape here that doesn't conform to SLDS best practices like the border color or the background color. The assistant is going to pick it up and it's going to say that, okay, the border color and the fill color is not matching the SLDS specifications. So that way you can, without fear, build something that you know is following all the best practices by using this linter. So let's remove this, and then I can just go to File, and once I click on Export, I can actually export it to export. I'll export the entire canvas. Yes, I can export it to PNG, JPEG, or PDF. There are a bunch of different formats in which you can export. Primarily, you'll share it as an image and get approvals. And because all of the components that you have dragged and dropped are the exact components from the SLDS blueprints, you need not worry about creating anything from scratch. Copy paste the code from the SLDS website or use the relevant base components, and your component is going to be ready within minutes. So that is how easy it is to prototype. And yeah, there is nothing much else that I can talk about in prototyping. So that's pretty much it. And once you have finished prototyping your component, the next step is to actually build it. And when it comes to building a component, there are two things that you'll have to do. So let's assume you have a component and you want to style it using SLDS. So first thing, you need to know whether or not you'll have to import the SLDS style sheet or not, is the first thing that you'll have to know. And the second thing is, what are the SLDS classes that you can use in order to style your components. Of course, with component blueprints, you need not even remember that. Just know what component you want. Let's say if you want a button, copy paste the code without even knowing what class is present. That's still okay. But most importantly, where are you creating your component, for what purpose you are creating the component, and whether or not you need to embed SLDS in your component or not. So for that, we need to know the different places where you can use SLDS. Of course, the first place is Salesforce. whether it is Lightning Experience or not. In Salesforce, you can use SLDS. And when it comes to Lightning Experience, that is your app pages, record page, home page, utility bar, the flow runtime, or communities, all of these come under Lightning Experience. And you don't have to explicitly import SLDS when you're building a component for Lightning Experience, which means you have a component, just write whatever business logic that you want without importing SLDS specifically. So that is the advantage with Lightning Experience. Now, outside Lightning Experience, inside Salesforce, but outside Lightning Experience, you have Visualforce pages, you have your standalone Aura apps, then you have your Lightning components for Visualforce, which means you're embedding an Aura component or a Lightning Web component inside a Visualforce page using Lightning Out. Or if you're using Lightning Out for external applications, then mobile apps, standalone web apps, all these three are external to Salesforce. So except for Lightning Experience, you need to import SLDS in all of these scenarios. And let's see, how do you do it in each of these? First and foremost, using SLDS in Visualforce. Most of you should already be aware about this because this topic is quite old. The most simplest way is to use Lightning style sheets equal to true. But if you use this, it's only going to style your standard Visualforce tags using Lightning styles. And if you want to use your component blueprints, or if you want to use the SLDS classes itself, then you'll have to use the tag apex:/SLDS and then create a div with the class SLDS scope, inside which then you can use your blueprints and SLDS classes. So to style standard Visualforce tags, use Lightning style sheets equal to true. And then to create random components using SLDS, use apex:/SLDS and give the scope. One best practice that you need to remember is do not wrap Visualforce tags inside SLDS scope. So once you create a div with SLDS scope, only make sure you write pure HTML in that. And all your Visualforce standard tags must be outside. And the reason for that is they are styled differently. When I say Visualforce tags, it means your page block table and stuff. Of course, things like Apex repeat can go inside SLDS scope because they don't have a UI of their own. But yeah, that is how you use SLDS in Visualforce. And I hope you are not using Visualforce still, because there is Aura, there is Lightning Web Components, and there is also recipes that we created to help you migrate. So migrate as fast as possible from Visualforce. And coming to Aura, so the standalone Aura applications, how can you import SLDS into that? Is just by writing extends force SLDS. With just this one line of code or this one attribute, SLDS style sheets are added to your Aura application. And in case you're using Aura for Lightning Out or applications for Lightning Out, then you need to extend it using Lightning Out app. This is anyways the syntax for which using which you expose an application to be used with Lightning Out. But even with this, you're going to get SLDS into your application. So use either this or Lightning Out app, and in both cases, style sheets are added. So I have, let's see. Now, as a best practice, use force SLDS instead of importing a style sheet. So I've seen instances where, let's say you have an Aura component, then I've seen people importing the SLDS style sheet into the Aura component. You actually don't need to do that, because if this component is embedded inside an Aura application, you can use force SLDS. If you are embedding this component inside Lightning Experience, you don't require this. So in both the cases, you don't really require this syntax. So yeah, don't use it. And to actually take a look at a small demo, so here I have built a couple of components, and here I have used SLDS in Visualforce, and you can see it is applied. You know it works. And here in the case of SLDS in Aura, so this is a component which has two buttons, and you can see they are styled according to SLDS. And if you take a look at the source code behind that, you can see it's just a simple Aura component, flexi page available for all page types, using base components Lightning Card. And what you'll notice here is I've not imported the style sheet, but yet it is styled using SLDS because I've embedded it in Lightning Experience. But instead of Lightning Experience, what I've done is I've embedded this inside an Aura app, and this is how it started looking. Because the Aura app was not extending Force SLDS, so the style sheet didn't get imported and the component didn't get styled. But the moment I imported Force SLDS, I wrote the attribute extends Force SLDS, the component is now automatically styled. So with this, really the key takeaway, of course I told this in the best practice, is that your component explicitly doesn't need to import SLDS because it's already going to be added in whatever scenario. So that is that about Aura. And now coming to using SLDS outside Salesforce. So things like Heroku apps, or let's say even your local host, or if you're using Lightning Out, you don't need to use this, but because you want to use our application. But really things outside Salesforce, or if you're using a Salesforce on mobile, the mobile SDK and stuff like that, you have both of these options. You can either download the zip file of SLDS, extract it, and include these folders into your resources and then use the style sheet, or you can import them as NPM packages. So really the way it works is, let's say I go to this code here. This is an LWC OSS project, basically a pure HTML implementation. You can see this is an HTML file in which I have put the link tag. And generally, even in general HTML web world out there, you import styles using the link tag. And this is a link to the SLDS style sheet. And where is this coming from? It's coming from this folder. So I've downloaded slds.zip, I have extracted it, and I've put the CSS file inside whatever folder structure I want. And then I've used it. It's as simple as that. Even if you have third-party CSS libraries like Bootstrap, you would use it the same way. Download the zip and then embed the CSS file and continue to use your style classes. So it's pretty simple to use it even outside Salesforce. Just the initial setup, there is one step. After that, just like you create your components, you create components and then the styles are going to get applied. So that is about using SLDS outside Salesforce. Now, what does the CSS bundle itself contain? So now when building, I told you the two steps is the first one to identify whether or not you have to import your styles that we have established till now, depending on the place where you're using SLDS, whether or not you have to import it. The second one is using the style classes. Now, for you to use the style classes, you need to understand what is offered to you. And in the CSS bundle that Lightning adds or you add, you're going to get the CSS framework. That means your grid layout, components, helper classes, all of it. You're going to get design tokens. We are going to talk about design tokens in just a bit. Then you're going to get icons. So remember the icons that I showed you in Sketch. Those are the icons that you're going to get here as well. And of course the Salesforce Sans font. This is the font that Lightning Experience uses. And this is also going to come to you as a part of the CSS bundle. So the typography is going to look the same in your component as well. Now, when it comes to CSS classes, we follow this notation called block element modifier notation. I'm sure you have heard of it, but if not, what it basically says is that each style class has three different attributes. The first one is the block, which defines the high level component. So in this case, it is the house. Next is the element, which defines an individual element inside a bigger block. And that is denoted with double underscore. So you say dot house double underscore window, which means it is using block and element. And finally the modifier, which says it's a different variation of a particular element. So house is the block, window is the element, and big is the modifier. And modifiers are denoted with a single underscore. So element is double underscore and modifier is a single underscore. And this is what BEM notation is. And in Salesforce, how are we using it? So in Salesforce here, we have this style class. For example, let's take SLDS button. Here SLDS is a namespace to prevent conflicts. So you can use SLDS along with other frameworks like Bootstrap and all. Because of this namespace, your styles are safe. And then the button is really a block, which represents a high level component, just like BEM notation. And then you have an element, which is denoted by double underscore. And what an element denotes is a descendant of a block. So if there is some child element inside a block, then you denote it with the element by giving it a double underscore. So descendants only. Then you have the modifier. A modifier actually represents a different state of either a block or an element. So in the standard BEM notation, you need not always have a block, element, and a modifier. So here you can see it just has a block and a modifier. It's a modifier because it is denoted by a single underscore. Basically it says it's a button, but it's a different variation of a button. So that is what modifiers are used for. And this is how SLDS uses, and most style classes are in this notation. And of course there are exceptions. So in these places and a little bit more, we have diverged from BEM because of brevity and comprehension. So we don't want the style classes to be too long. For that purpose, we have diverged from that notation. Now, at first glance, it looks the same. You can assume that SLDS mtop is a block, and then underscore medium is a variation, which means it is a modifier. But how is it different is, there is no standalone block for SLDS mtop. So if you just use SLDS mtop, it is not valid. Also, SLDS m is not valid. So this style class is a combination of block and a modifier, and the block is not standalone. Same thing for SLDS text heading large. All of it together is a valid style class, but SLDS text or SLDS text heading might not really be valid. Same is the case with all of these. So even though the notation looks like block, element, modifier, we have diverged from it in the sense that there is no individual block for these style classes. This is again just an FYI because we are going deep into SLDS. I thought it's helpful to know, but in no way should it affect how you use these classes. And when it comes to using these style classes, of course, the easiest way, like I've mentioned multiple number of times, is use base components or use the pre-production HTML from the site. But how I usually, my take in creating components first, if a component is meant for an app builder, that means you'll have to drag and drop it. I usually use Lightning Card. Otherwise, the background becomes transparent and all of that. So I use Lightning Card. And then I make sure I use this class, which is SLDS var p around medium. This is to add padding inside the card. If you don't add this padding, what happens is any content that you put inside the card sticks to the edges and it doesn't look so nice. So I personally make it a point to create this structure for any component that I create. And to understand this style class, it's important because you use padding and margin quite a lot. So SLDS is the namespace. Var, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But here P stands for padding. If you were to use a margin, then it would be M. Around denotes where the padding is applied. So it can be either on all sides of the component. If it is just on top of the component, you should write top, bottom, left, right. And then medium denotes the size of the padding, whether it is small, medium, large, extra large, and so on and so forth. So this is a basic syntax on how it works. This I'm calling it out because I use this frequently. I use this and margins a lot. And this is how I usually start by creating components, my personal preference. But what if I'm creating a web page altogether? What if I'm not creating a component for an app builder, but instead I'm creating a web page? For that, you'll make use of the grid system. I mean, not just for web pages, but even inside an individual component, if you have like a 3-column layout or 4-column layout, you'll be creating a grid. The app builder itself has its own grid. I mean, app builder lets you drag and drop components into like 3-column layouts, 2-column layouts. There is a header on top and all of that. And even inside your component, you can create multiple columns. Or if you're creating a web page, it can contain multiple columns. In that case, a grid is helpful, where the parent class is called SLDS grid. And all of your individual columns can be divs with the name of SLDS col. So you're creating 3 columns. And with SLDS call, what happens is, even though it looks to be equal, depending on the text that you put inside a column, it automatically gets resized. So that way you have no predictability on how long a column is going to be unless you put some text in it. That is why it is always useful to define the width of a column. So here I am dividing this entire space into, let's say, 6 parts. And in 6 parts, I want 4 parts to be occupied by column 1, 1 part by column 2, and 1 part by column 3. So for that I say SLDS grid and of course SLDS call, but then I explicitly call out the size of each column, which means irrespective of the width of the text that I put inside this column, the width of the column is going to remain the same. So if you want to look at an example, again I've created a demo over here for that. What you see here if I inspect element is 2 grids. So one is using SLDS call and the other is using explicitly defined sizes. So right here, you can see that there is one grid which has only SLDS call and the other grid where the sizing is explicit. And what you'll notice here, depending on the text, this column has increased in length, giving lesser space to 2 and 3. But then once I have defined the sizes explicitly, you can see that the text has wrapped, making sure all the columns occupy equal width. So that is the advantage of explicitly defining sizes, and I recommend that as much as possible. And one common mistake that everyone makes is they define the column sizes and leave it there. But really that is not how responsive layout works. So in the case of responsive layouts, let's say this example, where a column is occupying 75% width and column B is occupying 25%. When you're viewing it on mobile, it actually has to appear one below the other, which means column A occupies 100% of the width, column B also occupies 100% of the width, and it appears one below the other. If you don't consider this scenario, when you try to view it on mobile, what happens is column A and column B try to fit in the same space where it gets all smashed up, which we don't want. So for that, what you really have to do is specify the sizing of all the different sizes. So I have given SLDS size 1 of 1, which is default, which means going by the mobile first approach. On mobile, this column is occupying 100% width. But on sizes small, and small here has a definition of greater than 480 pixels, it occupies 1 of 2, that means it occupies 50% width. And medium, which is anything greater than 768 pixels, I want it to occupy 1 of 4, that is this one. So this is really a best practice. So whenever you're trying to use a grid system, make sure you're using the grid, you're using SLDS call, and you're specifying the sizing of the columns based on the device width. And yeah, that is pretty much it when it comes to the grid system. And I felt it is important to call this out because this is the most common mistake made when creating responsive layouts. Now, coming to the most important topic, design tokens. So what is a design token is really it's a name value pair. You can think of it to be like a custom label where you have a key and you have a value, and the main purpose of design tokens is reusability. And instead of hard coding values, you are really going to use a design token and use that dynamic value. And all of us know hard coding is bad. So yeah, design tokens have to be used as much as possible. And the concept of design tokens is not new because it's been around for quite some time. And SLDS itself has a set of standard design tokens, all of which again can be accessed from the website. So you can collapse it here and then you click on design tokens. You can see the complete list of all the design tokens and what it corresponds to. The token name, the color is what is given out. Most important column here is the support column. Not all design tokens can be used in Aura and LWC. Only the design tokens where GA is mentioned can be used. Anything with I, which stands for internal, even though it is a design token, you cannot use it in your custom component. So that is very important to remember. And like you've seen, SLDS has all of these standard design tokens. And these design tokens are exposed to both Aura and Lightning Web components, so you can use them. Next, how do you create custom design tokens? In the Aura world, you create what you call as a token bundle. And you do that by going to the developer console and you say file, new, and create lightning tokens, which let you create design tokens. And I've already done that. So let me show the design token to you. So here what you'll notice is the name of the design token, that is default tokens.tokens. And this is actually a recommended thing where the first token file that you create must have the name default tokens. And all the tokens that you specified with the name default tokens in the file default tokens are imported into your components by default. And here I'm extending force base, which means I also want all the SLDS tokens to be included. To create a custom token, I've used the notation Aura token, and I've given the name of the token my background color, and the value is some random value. Now to use this token inside Aura, it's very simple. I use the function token, and inside which I pass the name of the token. Now the name of the token can be any of the standard design token names that SLDS offers, or it can be a custom token that I just created. If you remember, my background color is a design token that I created, and I'm able to use it. What you can see is the syntax here, it says T, so I can use either T or token, doesn't matter, but this is how I use it inside Aura. And yeah, that is pretty much it when it comes to Aura. But what happens when you come to Lightning Web Components? So in LWC, we use what is called CSS custom properties. So CSS custom properties are a web standard. And as you know, Lightning Web Components is completely built using web standards. We are going to use CSS custom properties instead of design tokens. And one thing to remember about CSS custom properties are it is case sensitive and they can penetrate Shadow DOM. So one of the web standards that Lightning Web Components uses is Shadow DOM, where the styles of a parent cannot affect the styles of a child. That means the styles don't propagate. But in the case of custom properties, the value of the custom properties do propagate to the children. That is the first thing to know about LWC and custom properties. So design tokens in Aura is equal to custom properties in Lightning Web Components. Next, how do you use these custom properties is this way. So to define a custom property, you write the syntax hyphen hyphen and then the name of your property and then the color of the property. So instead of you declaring it inside Aura, like the Aura token, you can actually declare it in this way also. And then the way you use it is you use the keyword var. So instead of using the keyword token, which is very specific to Aura, you're going to use the keyword var, which is sort of a web standard. And you're going to give the name of your CSS custom property. And the best part is all of the standard SLDS design tokens and the custom design tokens you have created using Aura, both of them are exposed as CSS custom properties to Lightning Web Components. So LWC offers a lot of flexibility. You can use standard tokens, Aura tokens, or you can create your own custom tokens, custom properties, and then use them. So let's look at a demo of CSS custom properties and design tokens. So here I have a component that I've created where I'm using 4 different tokens. One I'm saying is a global LWC token, one I'm saying is an Aura token, one is a shared CSS token, and one is a token from the parent. So looking at the code behind that, it has 4 different divs like I've shown you in the output, and each div has its own class which implements a different CSS token. And if you go to the CSS file, you can see each of them. So first one, the standard SLDS token, I am using the keyword var and then hyphen hyphen LWC hyphen color brand. So hyphen hyphen LWC says that this is the standard SLDS token that I'm using. Now the next one, Aura token. And if you remember, I just created an Aura token with the name my background color. I can actually use that as well inside my Lightning Web Component, but I'm going to be appending hyphen hyphen C to it. So instead of hyphen hyphen LWC, I'll say hyphen hyphen C, which denotes my custom components, custom token. Then what I have here is a shared token. So for this, let me show you a file which I'm calling as shared CSS, where I've defined a token of my own choice. So I'm calling it my shared color. I can give it any name that I want. And the reason I've placed it in a separate file is because I want to reuse this CSS file across all of my Lightning Web components. And I want to use the same color. So assume things like, let's say you have your company or your client is giving you a color which has to be the branded color. And you want to use the same color across all of your different Lightning Web components. For that, you can do one of two things. The first one, of course, you can create it as an Aura design token because it is going to be available both in Aura and Lightning Web components, and it's global. So first preference is created here. But in case you want to create something that's only accessed by LWC and you want to share it across all LWC components, add it into a shared CSS file. A shared CSS file is nothing but a CSS file. Add it here and then import it. So using this import syntax, you can import any CSS file, any CSS component into another CSS file. So that way, any design tokens that I've defined here or any style classes that I've defined in the shared file can directly be used here. And that is what I'm doing by just saying var my shared color, because it's imported from the shared file. And finally, I'm using a token from the parent. So I've already told you that CSS custom properties have the ability to propagate from the parent to child. So what I'm doing here is I have a parent component. So you can see the name of this component is SLDS child. And I have a component called SLDS parent, inside which I've defined another custom CSS property, which I'm calling it my parent defined color. And what I'm doing is I'm using that my parent defined color inside my child component. So it still works because these propagate from parent to child. Now I can tell you the same concept in a different way. So the flip side of this is, now in case I want my child components colors or styles to be controlled by the parent, I can actually use a custom property here. And then I can define the value of this custom property in the parent. So you got it, right? So I can define the value in the parent and I can use that value in the child, or I can define the property name here and they can assign the value in the parent. There are two sides of looking at it. Now the second way of looking at it, where I'm able to expose a particular custom property and allow the control to pass to the parent, where the parent defines the color and the child uses that color. So that is exactly the concept of styling hooks. And so styling hooks are nothing but CSS custom properties that can be used to customize your base components or custom components. Now, like I said, the concept is the same. What we have done is from the base component, we have exposed this custom property, and the name, we have an opinionated name for that, where --SDS is Salesforce Design System. C stands for custom. Button is name of the element. Brand is the variant of that particular element. Color is the property name, and background is also a property, and I'm giving it a color. So using custom properties, so essentially styling hooks have been built on top of custom properties. It's just that we have followed our own naming convention. And if you define this in the parent, that is in your own component, if you define this statement, the lightning button is going to vary accordingly, because for all practical purposes, this is a child component to your component and it has exposed a custom property which you are modifying. So the style of this is going to change. Now, because we have exposed styling hooks, a new best practice has come into light. That is, do not override standard styles. So in case you want to change the color of a button, don't override the standard style and call it purple. Use a styling hook. So that is a best practice. Now, there is a sequence of steps that you'll have to follow when to use what. So whenever you want to change the color of something or you want to change the style of something, look for a design variation. So for example, if you want a button to be of a different color, there are different variants of the button. You can actually look for a variant first. If not, look for an SLDS class that can give you that color. So it's not just necessarily color, but you can use CSS classes to, let's say, add a margin. So instead of overriding a particular style, so let's say if you want to add a margin on right of a button, you should not be overriding the standard style by saying .slds button and margin left is 10 pixels. That is a big no-no, because there are predefined SLDS classes for that. You're going to use those. If none of these satisfy your requirement, then you'll go for styling hooks. And I've created a demo just to show you that use case. So here I have these styling hooks, and in which I have 4 sets of buttons. So buttons, and I repeated them 4 times. And here you'll notice there are 2 different variants. Both the buttons are stuck to each other. Both the buttons have a bit of a gap, and then both buttons changed color. Now the code behind that is actually pretty simple. There are 2 buttons. First is I'm using a base component with a label. Next I'm using a standard HTML button with the class SLDS button. Now both of them are styled differently. I want both of them to be in blue color. So instead of overriding any style, I have chosen to use a variant. For that, in Lightning button, I've given the variant to be brand. And in the case of HTML button, I'm using the style class of SLDS button brand. Next, I want to add some gap in between both of these buttons. So instead of overriding SLDS button or SLDS button brand and defining a margin, I'm using another SLDS class called SLDS var m left small, which again stands for margin left small or margin right small, in order to achieve that gap. And finally, I want to change the color of these buttons. And because I'm not supposed to override standard style classes and I have no other option to change the color to, let's say, purple, I'm then using styling hooks to change it to purple. And also notice what I've done. I'm using these styling hooks only on this particular section. So this particular style class. Basically it denotes only for this particular div with the class of section 4, override the color to purple, and that is what it is doing. So even though I specify a styling hook, I can actually scope it to a particular div element or a particular class. Now, in case I wanted the same purple color to apply to all the buttons, I would actually not scope it to a particular section or a class, but I would just say :host and specify the same styling hook. That way, this styling hook gets applied to the entire component instead of just a particular style class. And that is essentially about SLDS hooks. Now, this is a new feature. It is still in beta and we have created styling hooks only for 12 components. We are in the process of adding styling hooks to all the other components. Now, in order to know which components have the styling hooks or not, the best place is to go to the relevant documentation either in base components or in the SLDS website. For every blueprint, we actually include if there is a styling hook available or not. So here for button, you can see if you scroll all the way to the bottom and click on styling hooks overview, you can see all of the hooks that we exposed. So not just background color and border color, but all the different hooks we have listed down in this website. So take a look and then take a call whether you want to use them or not. So before going to the next slide, one more important point I forgot to mention is we are also going to launch something we call as global styling hooks. So like you have seen, in case you want to apply a particular color across all of the different components, I showed you either you can create an Aura design token or create it in a shared CSS file. So instead of that, we are trying to launch global styling hooks, define it once and then it applies everywhere. So stay tuned for that, forward looking. We don't know when we are going to launch it, but yeah, it's in the roadmap. Next, moving on to density settings. So this is one of the most important things where in a particular org, a user has a flexibility to choose between either a comfy layout or a compact layout, choose between both of these. And what happens when you change the display density is that the margins, the paddings become smaller so as to accommodate more text in a smaller area. And in case you are using custom styles, how do you respect this density setting? So if you obviously hard code, let's say the padding to 20 pixels, irrespective of the display density, it's going to stay 20. But how do you make sure your components accommodate display density settings is either use base components or HTML from the SLDS website, because both of these are going to respect the density settings as well by means of a few SLDS classes, which we are going to talk about. And those are these density aware classes. So instead of just saying SLDS m bottom small, you actually say SLDS var m bottom small, which denotes that this is a variable density class, and depending on the density that is chosen in the org, the styling of this is going to vary. So as a best practice, always use variable density classes. And in case you are trying to use design tokens in CSS, don't obviously hard code padding to 20 pixel, 30 pixel. Use the design token as appropriate. And this way, even your custom component is going to respect the display density styling. So that is pretty much about all the considerations that you need to have in mind when building custom components. And moving on to the final step, that is validate. I've spoken about a lot of SLDS classes. I've spoken about best practices, but how do you enforce those best practices? For that purpose, we created what we call the SLDS validator, which is an extension on top of VS Code. The best part is you need not download it and install it specifically. It comes as a part and parcel of the Salesforce extension pack. And what it gives you is smart suggestions and all of it. And the best way is to look at a demo. So here I have a web component, and I've used a bunch of classes. And you can see that SLDS validator has started flagging some of these. It's given a blue underline. And basically what it says is there is an updated design token for variable density. So you can see instead of using p around medium, I want to use var p around medium. So for that, there is a quick fix. I just click it and then done. Then one more important thing I forgot to mention when talking about BEM notation is that long ago when we launched SLDS, we used to have this double hyphen notation instead of double underscore and single underscore. And we replaced this with underscores. So there is a quick fix that we are giving out for that. So instead of using double hyphen, you have to use underscore. That is the latest convention. So for that, there is a quick fix that you can simply do. And not just fixing, but in case you're creating your own, you're starting to write your own component and you put your class and then you type in SLDS hyphen, we are going to give you a bunch of suggestions on what can be added as style classes. So all your var m left small, extra large, if you don't even remember the name of the style class, it's okay, because just type in SLDS hyphen and all the style classes are going to come to you along with a description of what it does. And if you want to further dive in and say, okay, I want SLDS, but I want to align something. So you just type in SLDS align, and then it populates the style classes where align is present. So you can see them and decide, okay, I want to align the text to the center. So I click this and the style appears. So that is one more thing, auto-suggest, that SLDS validator offers you. And not just in the HTML file, but the CSS file. It also flags you any errors that you have made in CSS. First and foremost, if you're trying to override any predefined colors or predefined classes, it's going to tell you that no, you're not supposed to override standard styles, create custom styles of your own. And if you're trying to use some CSS styling for which there is a design class already available. For example, for text align center, there is a utility class called SLDS text align center that you can use. So for that, it suggests you that you can click this bulb icon and say update. What it's going to do, it's going to remove the class from here. I mean, remove the style from here and also add the relevant class to HTML. So it does both of them. So you don't have to worry about going and manually adding the relevant class. It does both. Same thing for display flex. I can quickly fix it to SLDS grid. And then when it comes to color white, you can see I've hard-coded a color, but really I'm not supposed to hard-code colors because there are design tokens available. And for that purpose, again, I can click on this bell icon and you can see a bunch of different design tokens that you can use. So just say update to token and the entire syntax and the relevant token name, all of it is populated. Don't even have to remember the syntax name. But one thing that you'll have to check is whether this design token is GA or not. That is one thing that the SLDS validator doesn't do. It doesn't tell you whether this particular token can be used or not. It just says that there is a token present. Whether it is internal or GA, you have to go back to the SLDS website to check. And then font size, again, I've hard coded the font size here. I don't want to hard code. I want to use font size 2. But then I also see that there is a var font size 2, which means it respects the display density. So I'm going to use that and done. And that's pretty much it about what I wanted to cover in today's session. And in order to know more about all the concepts that I discussed, including styling hooks, blog posts which talk about the SLDS validator, how you can use SVG icons, all of it, please refer to this trail mix. It's pretty easy to remember, sfdc.co/SLDS-trail mix. Log into this, complete the trail mix, and of course, hopefully this session has been beneficial to you. SLDS is quite an old topic. People have been using it for quite a long amount of time. But hopefully you have learned something in today's session that will help you write better code. So with that, I would like to say thank you and have a nice day. And see you in my next session. And bye-bye.